Before we get started with this interview, I would like to thank all of you online or on the radio for listening to this interview. I mean, it was a really, really cool experience that not a lot of people get to do. And if Gabe is listening to this at some point in the future, I'd like to thank you directly, sir, for giving me the opportunity of interviewing you. Just in case you did not read any of the descriptions that I have posted on multiple forums and on Reddit, basically what happened is Gabe's mic died in the first 6 minutes of the interview, and we did not detect it, so we basically ended up just getting my microphone. However, after days of tedious editing, I think that I have made it sufficient enough to distribute on the internet and onto the radio. So I hope you all enjoy, and please forgive some of the audio parts. Hello everybody, today I'm sitting down with co-founder and managing director of Valve Software, Gabe Newell. In case you didn't know, he's responsible for the Half-Life franchise, Portal, Left 4 Dead, Team Fortress 2, Counter-Strike, and many, many more. Thank you for being with me.
Sure. I'm grateful that you didn't bring up Ricochet.
All right. Well, let's get started. So what is Valve up to these days?
Well, the main thing we did is we just got Portal 2 out the door. So we're sort of dressing everybody's wounds and de-traumatizing from all of the stress that's associated with that. We've got a bunch of updates we're working on for Steam, and we have Dota 2 coming.
Killer. So with the addition of Steam on the PlayStation Network, is Valve planning on shifting development focus to consoles, or are you going to remain developing games primarily for the PC?
Well, the main thing we think about is where our customers are. So we tend to be somewhat agnostic in terms of how we think about which platforms we're going to focus on. From a development perspective, we primarily develop on the PC, and then after that, adapt it to various other platforms. But when we sort of philosophically, when we think about platforms, it's to develop content and then try to figure out where our customers either want to buy it, whether they want to go into stores, whether they want to get it digitally, whether they want it bundled with hardware, and in terms of where they want to play it. Do they want to play it in their living room on a console? Do they want to play it on their MacBook, on an airplane? Do they want to play it in their den on their PC? So we really let our customers lead us there.
Okay. And concerning Dota 2, you mentioned that earlier. How does Valve plan on differentiating the game from the very popular League of Legends? It's a game actually that's not only free, but whose claim to fame is being an improved Dota.
We have a lot of confidence in IceFrog's designs, and he's continuing to drive forward with what he thinks is the best experience for Dota players, and that's what we're going to try to do with Dota 2. In general, we've never found it really helpful to think about what other game companies are doing. It just tends not to help you make better decisions, so we tend to be a lot more interested in, what happens in play tests. Mm-hmm. So when people come in to play the game, we watch them and see what's working for them and what isn't working for them. That's almost always led us in more productive directions than chasing product decisions that other companies are making.
All right, and Team Fortress 2 and now Portal 2, you guys have introduced microtransactions to the games, and microtransactions are actually becoming a sort of commonplace in the video game industry. How has this affected Valve's business model, maybe as a whole?
I think the most important thing for us that's coming, or that's driving that impulse, is to think about how we and our community create experiences. So, there's always a bunch of nonsense where people talk about the customer's number one, we're in partnership with our customers, but in really concrete ways in the gaming space, that's fundamentally true. So if you just look at something simple like server provisioning, that the number of servers that the game community puts up is orders of magnitude larger than what any individual company can put up, right? So that's not some hand-wavy kind of thing. It's just like the number of servers, the bandwidth that they allocate, the processing power that they represent is hugely greater. When we look at creating a marketplace for incremental content, what we're really seeing is the opportunity for the community to create content for itself. Right. So in the like the Polycount pack, the people there were made each of the people who were involved made over $40,000 a piece in 2 weeks.
And you're talking about the community members.
Community
right?
members.
Yeah, okay.
And when you look at, say, like an animator who's working on the next Transformers movie, sort of the highest paid animator, the lead animator working on the project makes about $130,000 a year. So when you look at how creative people get compensated for what they're doing, we see that, you know, the opportunity there is to create a system in which the community is very directly participating in the creation of and rewarding of making those experiences better. Right. And that to us is the super interesting opportunity. Mm-hmm. When we can not only just say, hey, put up a server, we can say, take what people love and push it even further and, you know, do it instead of having a day job. That we think is going to be super exciting, because near as we can tell, the amount of, when you create a framework in which the players are contributing to the content, you'll be able to build 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more experience for people than would be possible with a traditional development model. So that for us is the really interesting opportunity going forward. So we're putting all those pieces in place and thinking about, you know, how do you do aggregation, right? How do you say to somebody, you're building something that relies on other people's pieces, like if I'm building a single player experience, then I need maps and models and animations. So how does the community reward people for having lots of aggregated together pieces of content? Then you have this problem with ownership of assets that have positive externalities when a lot of people have them. So if you charge people for a map, you make it much harder for the map to find its maximum value, because people only play the maps that they have available to them. So as soon as you start directly charging people, you actually make a map a lot less valuable. On the other hand, it takes a lot of work to make a map. So how do you figure out so that people who create great maps get rewarded for that, at the same time you get the benefits of having widespread ownership of those same maps? So thinking through those kinds of issues is really fun right now. Mm-hmm. and pretty important to what we're doing. So Team Fortress 2 taught us a lot about what works and didn't. That gave us a set of experiments that we're running right now with Portal 2. The DLC for Portal, the first DLC for Portal 2 will let us test a bunch of stuff as well. But the fundamental thing we're trying to figure out is what's the framework to put in place so that the community can both create and reward the creation of more content. And that's the big challenge that I think we're struggling with over the next year or two.
Yeah, so you're definitely going to be continuing that idea.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's, yeah. And you said TF2 before is you guys' kind of experimental project where you test things on that and kind of see if that works. Is that true?
TF2 is the test bed for a lot of things. It's sort of, from a visual identity and from a community perspective, it's a good place to try out a lot of stuff. I'm sure that we'll use different models for different kinds of experiments. You know, Portal 2 also lets us test out some of the things that we thought we learned from TF2 and see if they're valid more widely. Another thing we did with TF2 was to work with a bunch of independent game developers where we gave them a lot of access to things which are traditionally thought of as not shareable. So, you know, Gladys would show up in AudioSurf. And our theory was that when you think about what you're creating as a content developer, you need to think about it as being helpful to other content developers. It's not this proprietary, locked away island, but it's a way, you know, it's a tool for community building and a start for that. So the Potato Fool's Day arc was sort of trying to see what would happen if we gave a bunch of independent developers the opportunity to use our assets and our properties as if they were theirs. And I think that that's been really successful. It's certainly been successful from our perspective, and the feedback we've gotten both from the community and from the other developers we worked with was, oh yeah, let's try to push this further in the future. How can we take advantage of this? What do we need in terms of platform features that will allow us to do that? Because there are lots of little things, like, so if I did something in one game, do we have all of the pieces put in place that can reflect an accomplishment that you achieve in one game is reflected in another game? And it's how do you build an adventure game that where you have all these different game engines, and yet progress and achievements and assets need to be able to move between them. So we feel that was a really good first step, and now we need to see what we learned from that, see what the implications are for Steamworks in terms of new features that we need to add, and then what's the next thing we want to try to do, where we work with a bunch of different application developers to create more value than we can as islands of content. And
you mentioned earlier about single player games. There's a rumor online that you guys won't be doing single player games anymore. Is that accurate?
I think what we're trying to talk about is the fact that not that we're not doing single player games.
Right.
All single player games, we'll play them. Portal 2, I think, is a pretty good example of what we've learned over the years in terms of how to create those experiences. It's more that we think that we have to work harder in the future, that entertainment is inherently increased in value by having it be social, by letting you play with your friends, by recognizing that you're connected with other people. That's the thing that we're trying to say, is that single player is great, but we also have to recognize that you have friends and want to have that connected as well. So it's not about giving up on single player at all. It's like saying we actually think that there are a bunch of features and capabilities that we need to add into our single player games to recognize this socially connected gamer. That every gamer is like got instant messaging. Every gamer has a Facebook account. Every gamer has all of these different things. So if you pretend that doesn't exist, you're ignoring the problems that you ought to be taking on. So it's single player plus, not no more single player.
Awesome. Okay. And also, since you're obviously extremely busy, do you ever get a chance to just play games for fun anymore, and are you just mostly focusing on the games that you're creating or helping create?
I love to play games. That's part of the reward of being in the game industry, is you get to play games. As a player, I tend to be, pretty obsessed.
Yeah.
Particular genre. There's some people like Robin Walker is, he plays 40 different games at the same time. Or I think Adrian is another person who's a particularly promiscuous gamer, and I tend to drill down obsessively into a specific game. Right now, for me, it's Dota 2. It's like, I always go, like, I could play a different game, or I could play more Dota 2. So,
yeah.
Right now, Dota 2 has me by the scruff of the neck hard. So the games I'm playing right now, I'm continuing to play WoW. I'm playing a game called Sword Poker on the iPad. I don't know, I've wasted more time on that game than I would have thought possible.
That's awesome.
It seems to be sort of an invisible game. I bring the game up, and most people never see of it. There's Sword Poker 1 and Sword Poker 2. There's some story about the developer. It was a Japanese developer called Gaia, and they disappeared. Like, they just disappeared. I've been trying to find out what's happened to them, and nobody seems to know. You go to their website, and it's still there, but they don't answer email. And
wow.
The games were pulled off of the Apple Store for a while, and then they reappeared. I thought for a while that I had to carefully protect my Sword Poker download to make sure it never disappeared. It's a great game. And Dota 2, I'm playing a huge amount of Dota 2.
That's killer. The Source engine obviously has gone through a lot of changes since it first came out. When do you think in the foreseeable future you guys will be planning on completely changing engines, or are you going to be indefinitely kind of updating Source, and are you going to remain with Source as your sort of main engine?
Well, there's always a tension. I mean, we get a huge amount of value from having, a lot of the things that we've been able to do because we have, we're always building on a robust and stable code set. And at some point, there is likely to be a set of changes that necessitate fundamental architectural changes. And so that's when we would respond with a more, going in and doing a more fundamental re-architecting. But in general, our approach has been to try to think about how to make ourselves be as productive as possible. How can we put as much, it's always tempting as a programmer, you sort of want to like throw everything away and start from scratch. But then you go and look and you say, actually, I'm a lot better off if I, keep this stuff stable and then only destabilize a small portion of my code base as possible. And you look back over time and you find out that shipping often and continuing to iterate and move forward is a way that you give more valuable to customers. Certain kinds of things, though, really force you to think hard about that, like Larrabee, the project that Intel was doing, really rewarded sort of a clean sheet approach to thinking about how you build games. So there certainly are times when you're better off moving away from any of the constraints that were created by previous generations. But Source has proven to be pretty resilient in terms of what we've been able to do.
Definitely.
And I think when people see Dota 2, they'll be really surprised at how far we're able to move the technology forward from, starting from Half-Life 2 to a completely different game genre with radically different graphics, physics, lighting, visibility, and all these other pieces. So.
All right. And also in previous interviews, you cited games such as Doom and Super Mario 64 as games that you not only love but have also influenced you as a developer. What games in the last decade do you believe have improved the gaming industry?
I thought parts of Spore were super interesting. I've talked to Will about it some. I think parts of Spore were way more valuable than other parts of Spore, so it's always interesting to talk to Will Wright about what their thinking was behind those different pieces. I think all of the stuff that's been happening with MMOs should cause people to think really hard.
Yeah.
The free-to-play movement has had a lot of implications that every game developer should think about. I think a lot of the sort of casual games get less, I think they get ghettoized when they should be causing a lot of game developers to be thinking hard. Like, people tend to say, oh, Plants vs. Zombies, that's a great casual game. It's like, no, Plants vs. Zombies was a great game here. I don't really care whether you think of yourself as a casual gamer or not.
Yeah.
There were some really interesting things about it that every game developer should be thinking about. I mean, you could abstract some of the design principles from Plants vs. Zombies and apply them to, Crisis 3 and probably find that you're making a better game. The social gaming stuff, there's a lot of signal to noise there, and we're still trying to understand better what the positives are rather than saying, oh great, we can just remake a bunch of crappy 80 games and add social networking to them and make and have a giant IPO. That seems to be not the right lesson to learn, while at the same time the fact that I think they had 100 million people playing Cityville within a couple of weeks of launching the product is incredibly significant in terms of you need to be thinking about what the lessons are there for every game. That's what goes back to that the single player plus kind of thing. You have to say there's clearly something there. You have to figure out what it is that makes entertainment more valuable when it's a connected social experience and not an island. What else is interesting lately?
You mentioned the free-to-play aspect, and do you think that's just more of developers and companies figuring out that they need to listen more to their base, their community? And
well, the thing that we're learning or thinking about free play in terms of the microtransaction side is how to get your customers engaged in the process of furthering the experience, which is different than thinking of it as a pricing or monetization model, which is how a lot of people have reacted to it. Another thing about the free-to-play model that's interesting, separate from community engagement and pricing, is the regularity with which things are happening. It's when you talk to some of the people who are in that space, they say one of the most important characteristics is that something new is happening every single day. You never go years without something changing or being different, and just the regular novelty of that is something that they point to as being important. And that's completely independent of a pricing model or a content production model. It's just the fact that it's an ongoing part of people's lives. And when people say, look at the pace with which we introduce new pieces or elements to our games, obviously we're not anywhere close to that.
right.
So it definitely makes you think hard about that part of our strategy and what we should be doing as opposed to what we're currently doing.
Portal is obviously in the same universe as Half-Life, and I've been contacted by a bunch of my friends and a bunch of people on the internet that really want me to ask you if Gordon Freeman and Chell will ever meet in any future games, or if that's even a thought, or if that's been thought about.
So when you're thinking about games, you sort of want to think about how characters collide. Mm-hmm. So, in their current forms, Chell and Gordon are very similar characters in terms of the phenomenology of the experience. So that obviously isn't what people are thinking. In terms of having these people coexist at the same time in the same place, that's obviously something that's part of the reason that Portal and Half-Life are in the same universe as we see opportunities there. How people would respond to those people not being the player themselves, but in fact being characters in the world, that would be a pretty interesting challenge for us. But, and it's up to us as designers and as storytellers to think how that would work. But right now, they're actually the player. So having you encounter yourself is obviously not what people are thinking of when they think of Chell. Actually, I'm curious how Chell and Alex would get along. I mean, given how I think about those two characters and what it would mean in these worlds, what would happen if those two characters encountered each other? Because I don't think they'd get along at first.
Yeah, and also you never hear Chell's voice; she's absolutely silent, so you have no idea what she sounds like, and you'd have to be introducing that, and that's going to be foreign to everyone else that's played as that character.
I also like the idea of Breen running into Gladys, because I think that would actually be kind of hysterical. I think that a lot of that stuff would write itself.
Yeah.
Just because there would be an edge to their interactions. I think they're both great characters, and when you have good characters, you can put them in a box and shake it. And
exactly.
Entertaining stuff will come out.
Yeah. And you guys have used silent characters mostly as for the main protagonists in all of your single player games I can think of on top of my head. Obviously, Left 4 Dead 2 is completely different than Left 4 Dead. But is that like a conscious decision so the the person playing the game feels engaged, or is that a completely different decision?
No, it's one of the choices you make in a design is what is the relationship of the player to the character. Mm-hmm. You always have to think about that, and it has implications across a bunch of the other choices that you make. So it's a choice we made in the past. If we changed that, there would be the consequences of that would ripple throughout the rest of the design that you're making. So it's just a choice you make.
Right.
And it's neither a good decision nor a bad decision. It's just a decision that has consequences. So if you change it, then you have to think about a bunch of other stuff that you're going to change as a result of that. For us, it was certainly a useful decision in the Half-Life series and in the Portal series. But we tend to like to run experiments and, see if we understand what the issues are. So it's not a hard and fast rule at all.
Also, like, what games have you enjoyed working on the most? It's kind of a vague question. I'm not sure if you can even answer that, but
for me, the experience is more about the people that I get to work with. So, rather than the specific game.
Right.
There are just a lot of people here that are a huge amount of fun to work with. I like it's like I get to be a fan of the other people who are here. It's always exciting to see what Brandon Reinhardt comes up with. It's always exciting to see what Chris Green has running. I mean, you walk into his office and you look at what he's doing and you go, oh my God, is that possible? Aaron Seeler, there are just a lot of people here who it's always fascinating to see what they're able to pull off. Eric Wolpaw's hysterically funny. Jay Pinkerton is incredibly funny. I've never sat in a meeting with either one of those guys where I haven't, laughed out loud. But by the time it's like being in, getting free stand-up comedy. Think of it more in terms of who are the people that I get to work with than I do thinking which of our individual games are the most fun to work on.
I'm sure it's definitely easy for that to happen too. I mean, this place is probably isn't your typical business. Like, where all the executives meet in like suits and they have their little discussion on the table. Walking in here just looked like it's really fun just to get here every day in the morning, I'm sure.
So when I was at Microsoft, when I left Microsoft, I was about 50th in seniority of about 18,000 people. And for that generation that I was part of, I mean, we were just very lucky. When I joined Microsoft was the third largest software developer on the east side of Lake Washington, right? Much less the largest software developer in the world. And none of us had any idea what was going to happen. And so we were all incredibly lucky. And we all made a ton of money, through stock options and stuff like that. And so I reached the point where I didn't have to work anymore. I could do anything I wanted to do. And, most people think in terms of sort of leisure, right? Okay, well, I'll sit on a beach or, sail on a boat or whatever. And for me, the thing that is the most fun, the thing I enjoy doing the most is coming to work each day, when working with the people I work with and being part of what happens in these offices. And so I think that's true for most of the people here. Nobody's here because they need a job, because every one of them could get a job by picking up the phone and, calling up, Bobby Kotick at Activision or John Riccatello at EA and say, hey, I've got this idea, give me $20 million, I'll go make a game. They can all do that. So the reason they're here is not that they don't have choices. The reason that they're here is that this is the place that they enjoy working at the most. And the number one determinant of that, more than anything else, are the people who are in the offices next to you. So for the same reason that when I think of, gee, I could retire and do anything I want, I know I'll go see what Jay Stelly and Grenier are doing today. I think that that's true for most people here, is that we're creating an environment which, if you can do sort of anything, well, it's to keep doing what you're doing and do it better. Exactly.
It's about being happy with what you do every day and not just sitting on some like monotonous beach and just wasting your entire rest of your life, I guess.
Working on your skin cancer.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I read that you are a knife collector. Is that right?
Yep.
And you have over 600 knives?
I have too many knives.
Too many. And do you have like a favorite? Like, I don't know much about knives, so I'm kind of relying on you to educate me here. But
so the thing that I've always liked knives as a kid. The thing that I always liked about them is that they were one of the few areas that sort of had aesthetic qualities and utility, right? They were really cool looking things that actually you could use as a tool. And that's why, as opposed to other things like, sculpture.
Right.
you know, unless you're using it as a bludgeon, you know, or using it to hold up a bird feeder. But it's not a tool. And knives to me were that interesting combination of utility and beauty. So that is what tends to drive a lot of my thinking. So there are a lot of great knife makers out there that I really like. Neil Blackwood in Florida is a great guy. You know, Buster Wierenski, before he died, I thought did great, is awesome stuff. S.R. Johnson out of Utah does amazing stuff. Dietmar Kressler in Germany does these really beautiful integral knives. My favorite knife maker, I think, overall is a guy who runs something called Matherton Forge. His name's Kevin Cashin. And you know, it's not any disrespect to any of the other great knife makers, but he does, what I really like about him is the thinking process that goes into a lot of his decisions. So right now, one of the things he's trying to understand is not just some of the classic patterns of, you know, Renaissance or Middle Age or Viking migration era making. It's not just what they built, but it's how they built it. So, you know, he's looking at this problem. He's working on this ring dagger recently, and you know, it would have been trivial for him to whip out his TIG welder and put the ring on, but the problem that he had with that is that obviously that wasn't how they had been made originally. So he spent a bunch of time understanding the process by which it would have been possible. And he actually discovered some sort of archaeologically significant characteristics of the process. Like, so he's sort of like, oh, so I finally understand what this old drawing in this obscure textbook means. You know, because now that I've tried to do this, I can see that what they're doing is this. And then, you know, he publishes that information. So that I really appreciate, because he tends to think of himself not just as a knife and sword maker. He actually thinks of himself as being part of a larger community, which obviously resonates with how Valve tends to think about our role in the gaming community. So here in the Seattle area, there are these great, you know, Tom Ferry is, you know, Seattle is actually really blessed to have some outstanding master smiths. There are relatively few master smiths in the history of knife making.
Oh, really?
There are several of them here in the Seattle area who are super accomplished. So Tom Ferry has actually very kindly taken the time to teach a bunch of Valve employees about blacksmithing.
That's killer.
So everybody here shows up at work with burns and smiles on their faces as, you know, they have a chance to go beat on hot metal. One of the best knife makers in the world, in Tom Ferry. So it's also great to do stuff like that.
That's awesome. Wow. And I think this is the last question I have. What advice would you give for people aspiring to get into the game industry?
So the rules are changing really quickly in terms of what a career path looks like. So the thing that I would really encourage people to do is start, rather than worrying too much about the career steps, is instead focus on the more fundamental task, which is to build something, release it to people, have some mechanism of gathering feedback about it, and then iterating and re-releasing it. So that loop teaches you more and is more valuable than just about anything else you can do. So it used to be that there were sort of traditional pathways of getting into games companies, like going into support or going into QA, and then you sort of network inside of the company and eventually have a chance to move over into game development. And those sort of pathways in the large publishers are sort of drying up, right? They're sort of putting firewalls in place to actually keep people from making that transition. At the same time, your ability to gain visibility in the professional game development community by doing your own work, either as an independent or as a mod or something like that, has never been greater. And there's sort of a recognition that the people in that space sort of have the freedom to do some of the most interesting, thought-provoking, and recognizably valuable work. So, you know, that's the thing that I would recommend is, you know, just today, don't wait, don't think that somebody else is keeping you from doing this. is start building something, releasing it, find out what people think, and then make it better. It's just as true of a radio show, and you can learn just as much by doing that as you can by picking up a C++ compiler and trying to write code. When I look around at the institutions that are really helpful in people understanding that, Seattle's really lucky that DigiPen is located here. I mean, we get candidates, who want to work here from all over the world, so we tend to have a visibility into what people are learning at the various programs, whether it's in Europe or in Asia or in North or South America. And it's amazing that in our own backyard, DigiPen consistently is giving the people the right kinds of experiences and creating the framework in which they're learning the right kinds of lessons. So, we've had a bunch of people come out there out of their undergraduate program who are better prepared to be contributing on game projects than people who've been in the industry for 5 or 6 years. So something really right is happening at DigiPen and happening on a really consistent basis. So, those are sort of my 2 recommendations. Start building and shipping content yourself and learn as much as you can by going and iterating that. Find a couple of friends to help you so you can be more, increase the scale of what you're doing. And then if you're looking for an academic program, I went to Harvard, I had friends who went to MIT, my brother went to Stanford, and of all of these places, I think DigiPen is still very much at the forefront of delivering the best people to the video game industry.
All right. Do you think that the internet has if you were a developer or just a small time, you're just starting up, do you think distributing what you've made on the internet is helpful, or do you think that maybe that's counterproductive because everyone else is doing that?
Oh, I think it's incredibly productive. I think that it's that other professional game developers pay a huge amount of attention to what is happening on the internet. We are constantly looking at what people are releasing and tracking on the people who are doing the interesting work. So it's a great way for people like myself or, a great example is when we were starting Valve, and we asked John Carmack, who's the founder of id and creator of Doom and Quake and Rage and so on. We said, who should we hire? Who should we go after? And he said, well, you could go after these guys who are sort of the old names in the games industry, but the guys I think you really should go after are these people that have had success because of the internet, right? So, that's how we found Steve Bond and Daryl Casale and Dave Riller, people who've been incredibly critical to our success, and they were all people who connected with each other and were finally able to do game development because of the internet. So, no, I think it's a great idea to you learn a huge amount, and it's also the best possible calling card. I mean, if you look at people at traditional media companies, they're astonished at how quickly people develop and how large an audience people can build completely on their own. Right? If you come out of like a Time Warner or someplace like that where you spend 20 years before you're ever even allowed to be within 1,000 miles of a reader or a viewer, and then you find these people who are like, oh yeah, I'm on my 3rd game that I've released on the internet, and each time I've gotten 10 times as many people. It's like, oh wow, I'm still 15 years away from having 1 reader, much
right.
Be learning all the lessons you're learning by interacting with the audience and making your stuff better. So yeah, absolutely. Internet is a great way to go. It's a great way to learn, and it's also a great calling card in terms of finding other people that you can join with to further your personal and professional ambitions.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have. Thank you so much for letting me come here and for letting Armand come here as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to people.